The film opens with a police operation that at first looks like a routine raid, but within seconds, everything spirals into chaos. The officers move in to capture a group of criminals, only for the suspects inside the building to launch a brutal counterattack. Gunfire erupts from every direction, turning the entire scene into a deadly ambush. Several officers are hit as the situation quickly gets out of control, but Santiago manages to keep his focus. He lines up a precise shot and fires, causing a powerful blast that tears through the building and gives the police the opening they need. With the structure breached, the officers storm inside and finally manage to arrest the surviving men. Captain Diego starts interrogating the captured criminals, and one of them, terrified for his own life, breaks under pressure. He starts giving up information about a dangerous man named Lara, including where he might be hiding. But his confession doesn't save him. In the end, he is executed along with the others, proving that in this world, telling the truth, or even pretending to, offers no protection at all. The police gather the remaining prisoners and prepare to load them into a transport van. Just then, a woman suddenly bolts from the scene. Santiago reacts immediately, chasing after her while ordering some of the officers to pursue her on motorcycles. What follows is a tense chase through unfamiliar streets, with Santiago pushing hard to catch her. But the woman knows the area far better than he does, and she manages to slip away. Santiago eventually loses track of her completely and contacts Diego, explaining that she got away because he doesn't know the terrain. He then says he is heading back to regroup with the others. At least that is what he wants everyone to believe. In reality, Santiago quietly slips into a nearby house, one he clearly recognizes, and finds the very same woman waiting inside. Her name is Yana, and it quickly becomes obvious that this was not their first meeting. They know each other well. Yana had gone there to warn her brother, believing she still had time because Santiago had told her the raid would happen at noon. Since it was still morning, she thought she could get him out before the police arrived. Santiago explains that the schedule was changed without his control, but Yana is furious and demands that he help get her brother released from custody. Santiago, however, feels she should be grateful he survived the operation at all. That is when Yana reveals something far more important. She tells him she knows where Loria is. In fact, she has known for 3 months. Santiago is stunned and asks why she kept that from him, especially since she has been working as his informant. Yana admits that things changed after she received a promotion. Now she is responsible for delivering vans filled with cash directly to Loria's hidden house deep in the jungle. According to her, the place is not just a residence, it is practically a vault. Then she drops an even bigger bombshell. Loria has been paying Captain Diego, and the same men who hired Santiago, enormous amounts of money. They have all been involved from the beginning, letting Santiago waste years chasing false leads while they protected the man he was hunting. Yana believes that now, with the real truth in his hands, Santiago finally has the chance to do something meaningful. The revelation leaves him completely silent. Not long after, Santiago visits retired Captain William Miller, who is finishing a motivational talk in front of new army recruits. When the two men see each other again, there is genuine warmth between them. They embrace like old brothers in arms, happy to reconnect after so much time. Santiago has already sent William a message about the situation, so they step aside and discuss the job. William is interested, but only on one condition. Santiago needs to contact Tom, another old friend from their former team. Tom has since moved into civilian life and now works as a realtor, though he clearly does not seem fulfilled by it. Santiago eventually tracks him down, and Tom is visibly surprised to see him after so many years without contact. Santiago gets straight to the point. He tells Tom there is a job available, 1 week of consulting work, guaranteed to pay $17,000. Tom is cautious. He reminds Santiago that he is retired and no longer part of that world. Santiago understands, but he also knows Tom is curious. He explains that the target is Gabriel Martin Lora, a man he has been trying to locate for years. Back then, Santiago could never get close, but now he finally has a confirmed location. Tom still hesitates. His personal life is complicated. He is dealing with his ex-wife, Molly, and trying to stay present for their daughter, Tess. Santiago does not push too hard. Instead, he suggests Tom at least look over the file before making a final decision. Later, the two drive together to pick up Tess from the house. On the way, Tom starts asking more about the money. Santiago explains that the $17,000 is only for reconnaissance. If they decide to move ahead with the full operation, the payout could become much bigger. He has made an arrangement with the agency. They will be allowed to keep 25% of whatever they recover. Since Loria is believed to have more than $75 million in cash, that cut could change all their lives. Tom questions whether any of this is legal. Santiago insists that it is, and even if the situation exists in a gray area, he argues that men like them have already sacrificed enough for their country. After everything they gave and the way they were treated afterward, Santiago believes they have earned the right to take something back. Tom finally softens and agrees to review the file. After that, Santiago meets William at the gym and updates him on how the conversation with Tom went. It happens to be fight night at the gym, and they are there to support Ben, another close friend from their old circle. Soon, Francisco, Ben's brother and the final member of the group, arrives as well. The men greet each other with the kind of affection that only comes from shared history, exchanging hugs and smiles after years apart. Santiago does not waste time. He lays out the job for them, explaining the opportunity and the target. But Frankie is not immediately convinced. He has a baby now, and his partner would not be comfortable with him getting involved in this kind of mission. On top of that, he has lost his pilot's license, which makes him feel even less useful for the operation. Santiago tells him that a license is not what matters. Since he is already working with the army in the area, they do not need an official pilot on paper. What they need is someone they trust completely. He explains that this mission gives them the chance to bring down a truly dangerous man, while also walking away with a reward big enough to make the risk worthwhile. Ben then reminds everyone that tonight is supposed to be his fight night, and just like that, the conversation pauses so the whole group can head out and support him. Before things move on, Frankie opens up about why his situation is more complicated than the others. He admits he was recently caught using drugs, and because of that, he has been suspended while his case is still under review. That alone makes him nervous about getting dragged into anything risky. Frankie then asks whether William is actually committed to the job. William makes it clear that his decision depends on Tom. If Tom agrees, then he is in. Ben, on the other hand, does not need much convincing. He says he is ready to take the job, which immediately puts a smile on Santiago's face. But before they can continue discussing it, Ben is called toward the ring, and the focus briefly shifts back to the fight. Soon after, Tom arrives and joins the rest of the guys. He tells them he has gone through the file and understands what Santiago is proposing. From what he sees, the setup needs 5 men and a pilot. After thinking it over, Tom finally agrees to participate, but only if the rest of the team is on board. He also makes one thing very clear. As far as he is concerned, he is only agreeing to reconnaissance, nothing beyond that. Santiago turns to Frankie next, waiting for his answer. After a moment of hesitation, Frankie also agrees. Santiago is clearly relieved because now the old team is finally back together. A few days later, they reach the area behind Loria's property to begin scouting the house. The men spread out into separate observation points, staying connected through their comms as they watch every movement around the compound. Ivana is scheduled to arrive for her usual money drop, and during that visit, she is supposed to secretly record the inside of the house for them. From his position, Frankie spots children on the property and immediately raises the concern with Santiago. He is uncomfortable with the idea of kids being anywhere near the operation. Santiago reassures him that the family will not be an issue. According to him, Loria is strangely religious, which is almost absurd considering the kind of man he is. Every Sunday morning, he sends 3 of his guards to attend the 6 o'clock church service. When those guards return, he sends most of his security detail, along with his family, into town for Mass. That brief period leaves only Loria and 3 guards inside the house, creating the cleanest possible window for the team to strike. Ivana arrives at the compound just as William, watching from another position, notices something disturbing. An execution is about to take place. Loria walks out and, with no hesitation at all, shoots the captured men one after another. There is no anger, no emotion, no second thought. To him, it looks like another ordinary task in an ordinary day. Watching all of this unfold, Frankie asks why Ivana would risk her life helping them. Santiago explains that she wants her brother freed from jail, and this is the price she is willing to pay for that chance. Meanwhile, Ben spots ground sensors in the area and warns the others. Almost immediately after that, William sees 2 men on motorcycles heading in Ben's direction. He tells Ben not to move and says he is coming over to cover him. Inside the house, Ivana presents the money records to Loria and his bookkeeper. The atmosphere is tense, every second stretching longer than it should. The bookkeeper carefully checks the documents while Loria watches. After several nerve-wracking moments, the numbers are approved, and Loria stamps the records, confirming the drop. Outside, the 2 men on motorcycles pass close enough to become a serious threat, but luckily, they do not notice anything unusual. They eventually turn around and leave, giving the team the signal that it is time to pull back from the property before their luck runs out. Later that night, the group gathers at a bar for drinks. William asks Santiago what the next step is. Tom believes the Sunday opening is clearly the best option. Bringing in a full military force would create too much noise and could easily turn the whole thing into a war. William agrees and asks Santiago when he plans to present the operation to the agency, but Santiago has changed his mind. After seeing the house and understanding the layout, he no longer wants to hand the plan over to anyone. Instead, he believes they should carry out the mission themselves. Tom immediately reminds him that they only agreed to take $17,000 to help the narcotics unit map the target and prepare the raid. That was the deal. Santiago insists they do not need anyone else. If they are smart and move carefully, they can take Gloria down on their own. Tom knows Santiago too well, and now he starts getting suspicious. He asks whether the agency even knows about this operation at all. William then asks who actually paid their consulting fees. Santiago hesitates and says the situation is complicated, but Tom is not buying it. To him, there is nothing complicated about $100,000 suddenly appearing for a job like this. The others quickly tell him to lower his voice, realizing this is not the kind of conversation they should be having in public. They leave the bar and step outside, where Santiago finally admits the truth. The money came from him. The group reacts with disbelief. William is especially angry that Santiago lied to them. Santiago tries to defend himself, saying he only asked them to come, observe the compound, and build a plan. Now that they have seen the target for themselves, he is giving them a choice. They can execute the operation alone and keep everything they find, or they can walk away and let him bring in the agency. But Santiago does not really believe the second option will work. If official forces get involved, Gloria will probably hear about it before they ever reach him, and once that happens, the chance will be gone. Santiago then speaks more personally. He says he is tired of watching all their years of service mean nothing. For 17 years, they gave everything, risked everything, and walked away with almost nothing to show for it. He points out the problems each of them is facing, reminding them that every man standing there has been left behind in one way or another. For once, he argues, they could use the skills they spent their lives building to benefit themselves, and maybe still take down someone who deserves it. His words hit harder than anyone wants to admit. No one answers immediately, but every face shows that the idea has gotten inside their heads. Later, inside the car, William asks if they are really considering it. Tom brings up the biggest concern, Ivana. He does not trust her. Santiago says they will know soon enough, because she is supposed to deliver the recordings the next day. William then asks Tom how he would run the operation if Ivana's information turns out to be reliable. Tom starts laying out the plan in detail, explaining how they could enter the compound, hit the target, collect the money, and get out without being trapped. The fact that he has a strategy ready tells everyone that, despite his doubts, he is already thinking like the mission is real. The next day, Santiago meets with Ivana. She carefully passes him the recording without drawing attention. But Santiago has another request. On Sunday morning, he needs her to bring an extra van into the compound. That vehicle will be essential for what they are planning. Ivana agrees, but only because Santiago promises something in return. He tells her that he will get her and her brother out of the country, and he will also give her $2 million. For Ivana, that is enough to risk everything one more time. She accepts the deal, and Santiago assures her that he will keep his word. Later on, the team gathers inside a shipping container where Santiago has secretly prepared everything they might need for the mission. Weapons, gear, supplies, it is all waiting there, arranged and ready. He plays the footage Ivana recorded inside the compound, and the men study it carefully. The video confirms two crucial things. Gloria is definitely inside the house, and so is the hidden money. Santiago also tells them that Ivana will bring an extra van onto the property, giving them another vehicle to load and move the cash. Their extraction aircraft has already been arranged as well. At this point, every major piece of the operation is in place. Tom asks for a moment to clear his head and steps outside the container. Santiago follows him, knowing this decision matters most from him. Out there, Tom finally admits the truth. Part of him has missed this life. The danger, the planning, the precision, the feeling of being useful again, it is all still there. After a brief pause, he makes his decision. He is in. Back inside, Tom takes control of the room and lays out the operation with the seriousness of a man who has done this many times before. He explains the plan step by step and makes sure everyone understands the rules they need to follow. Timing, discipline, restraint. If they want to survive and escape clean, there can be no improvising unless absolutely necessary. When the day of the raid arrives, the men return to the area behind Gloria's compound and move into position. They wait, watching closely as the family and most of the guards leave for church, just as Santiago predicted. Moments later, Ivana arrives with the second van and manages to get through security without raising suspicion. After completing her part, she drives away in the other vehicle, giving the team their signal. The men advance toward the house. They move quickly and silently, overpowering the three remaining guards. One of them is shot in the leg during the struggle, but the team keeps moving. Their next priority is Loria. They search room after room, expecting to find him hiding somewhere inside, but he seems to have vanished. They enter his office and realize something is wrong. Loria is gone, and worse, it looks like the money may be gone with him. Frankie immediately says they should leave before the situation turns bad, but Santiago notices something unusual in the room. There is a strong smell of fresh paint. That detail catches Tom's attention, and after a moment, he understands what Ivana meant when she said the house itself was a safe. The money is not inside a safe. The safe is the house. Santiago starts striking the walls, and soon the truth is revealed. Bundles of cash are hidden inside the structure itself, packed behind the walls from floor to ceiling. The discovery electrifies the team. Suddenly, the mission is not a failure at all. It is far bigger than they imagined. They begin ripping open the walls and stuffing money into bags as fast as they can. Even while they work, Santiago remains convinced that Loria is still somewhere inside. As the men keep searching, they uncover even more cash hidden in another wall. Every new section they break open reveals another fortune. The clock is working against them. They have only 8 minutes before they need to leave, so they begin hauling the bags into the van. But the money seems endless. Every time they think they have found the last stash, another wall exposes even more bundles. The entire building is practically built around the cash. Before long, the van is packed with bags, but Tom still keeps tearing into the walls, hunting for more. The others argue that they already have more than enough and need to get out immediately, but Tom insists they still have time. Ben pushes back, warning that the window is closing. Santiago, however, wants one final sweep through the house to locate Loria before they destroy the place. Once they are done, he says, they will burn everything down. The group agrees and spreads through the house again. During the search, a man suddenly opens fire on them. The team reacts instantly, shooting back and killing him. Santiago confirms the dead man is Loria, but the victory comes with a cost. William has been hit. The guys rush to him and provide quick first aid, trying to stabilize him before things get worse. Then Ben returns from the van with urgent news. The first shift of guards is coming back. With time almost gone, Santiago suggests a fast escape plan. Each man should grab a bag of cash, set the house on fire, and disappear through the jungle. But Tom refuses. He is not willing to abandon the van full of money, and more importantly, he wants William brought home safely. His alternative is direct and dangerous. They take out the returning guards and drive out with everything they can carry. The others agree. They eliminate the guards who have already entered the house, but then a second van of armed men comes through the gate. The team opens fire, takes them down, and seizes the vehicle. They split between the two vans, placing the money-filled one behind the SUV as they move toward the exit. At the gate, they spot the family's van waiting to enter the compound. The moment is tense, but they slow down, pass carefully, and avoid drawing attention. Somehow, they make it out of the property. They reach an intersection where Ivana and her brother are waiting. Soon after, William's contact arrives in a small light aircraft, which immediately confuses the group. There is no way all of them, plus the money, can fit into something that small. William pays the man his share, and just then, the real extraction helicopter appears. The pilot in the small aircraft leaves, having served only as the connection. The team starts loading the cash into the helicopter's cargo net, but there is too much of it. Since all the bags will not fit outside, they throw some inside the helicopter with them. Frankie quickly realizes the aircraft is overloaded. With roughly $250 million weighing them down, he warns that they need to dump some of it before they take off. The others refuse. No one wants to leave that much money behind after everything they have risked. Instead, they decide to chance it. The helicopter lifts off, carrying the team, the cash, Ivana, and her brother. For a moment, it seems like they may actually pull it off. They arrive at the drop-off point for Ivana and her brother. Before letting her go, Tom asks her several important questions, making sure nothing about her story can lead back to them. Santiago then steps in and hands her $3 million, more than he originally promised. He carefully tells her what steps to follow next so she and her brother can disappear safely. Ivana warns him that the money is far more than $75 million. It does not belong only to Loria, which means more powerful and dangerous people will come looking for whoever took it. Santiago tells her he will handle that part, but he also warns her not to remain anywhere in South America. If the organization finds her, they will not spare her. Once Ivana and her brother are gone, the team gets back into the helicopter. Tom is still uneasy. He believes Ivana may be lying and hints that they should have dealt with her permanently before she became a problem, though he avoids saying it directly. Thankfully, the rest of the men do not agree with that idea. As they continue through the mountains, the helicopter begins struggling. Warning beeps fill the cabin as the aircraft fights against the combination of heavy cargo and high altitude. Frankie checks the situation and realizes they are not going to make it unless they reduce the weight. He tells them they need to throw out the $50 million sitting inside the helicopter with them. Santiago hates the thought of abandoning that much cash in the middle of nowhere, but there is no other choice. If the helicopter fails, none of them will live long enough to spend a single dollar. One by one, they push the bags out into the empty landscape below. After the money is dumped, Santiago moves back toward Frankie and asks for an update on their status. The helicopter behaves almost like it has turned against them. The warning alarm keeps screaming as they push higher through the mountains, and then the sound becomes even more frantic. Before anyone can properly react, the aircraft suddenly starts dropping, trailing a thick cloud of smoke behind it. Everyone inside is shaken. Frankie fights with the controls, trying desperately to stop the helicopter from spinning out, but they are losing altitude fast, and he knows they may have no choice but to bring it down. Tom warns that if they crash in the wrong place, none of them will survive, but Frankie keeps working to level the aircraft long enough to find somewhere safer. Tom tells the others to brace for a rough landing. He remembers seeing a farmer's field on the other side of the ridge when they flew up, and Frankie realizes that might be their only chance. He turns the helicopter toward it, trying to keep the aircraft steady just long enough to reach open ground. But there is still one major problem. They cannot land with the cargo net full of money hanging beneath them. If they try, the load could pull them down and tear the aircraft apart. Frankie tells the others they have to release the net. Losing the money is now the only way to avoid losing their lives. He gives them instructions to release the cargo, but the mechanism fails because the helicopter is already badly damaged. Frankie tells them to use the manual override on the cargo hook. Ben volunteers without hesitation and moves into position. Carefully, he manages to kick the release with his leg, but in doing so, he nearly slips from the helicopter entirely. William grabs hold of him, keeping him from falling, while Frankie continues trying to guide the failing aircraft toward the field. Ben realizes that if he stays where he is, he may not survive the landing, so he makes a split-second decision and jumps clear at the right moment. Seconds later, Frankie brings the helicopter down hard. It slams into the ground, skids violently, and spins across the field before finally grinding to a stop. For a moment, everything is silent except for the sound of everyone catching their breath. Miraculously, no one is seriously injured. They are battered, shocked, and exhausted, but alive. Ben soon reaches them, and the group climbs out of the wreckage. But relief does not last long. They quickly notice that the local villagers have already found the scattered money and are helping themselves to it. Tom immediately puts together a plan to retrieve the cash. Since their communications equipment was destroyed in the crash, he tells the team they will have to rely on hand signals. With their weapons strapped on, Tom and Santiago approach the farmers, hoping to handle the situation without violence. They try to explain that they are connected to the army and that the bags belong to them. One of the villagers suggests they should call a rescue helicopter. Tom and Santiago assure him that help is already coming, but the farmers are not convinced. They point out that the men are alone, they have no uniforms, and there is no visible proof of what they are saying. Santiago does his best to keep the conversation calm, while Tom tells the villagers to stop taking their property. The farmers argue that the money landed on their land, and because of that, they believe they have a claim to it. The mood begins to shift, voices rise, the villagers grow more aggressive, and Santiago keeps trying to ease the tension before it breaks. From farther away, Frankie has his rifle trained on the situation, but with the comms gone, he cannot speak to Tom or Santiago. He can only watch the confrontation worsen. Then the farmers move as if they are about to attack. Frankie fires. The shot changes everything. Santiago and Tom immediately draw their weapons and open fire as well, bringing down several of the men. Ben, Frankie, and William rush in, and together the team forces the remaining villagers to retreat back toward the settlement. One wounded farmer is still alive. He pleads with Tom to end his suffering. Tom does not want to do it, but after a heavy moment of hesitation, he pulls the trigger. The act clearly affects him. Whatever confidence the team had before, this moment stains the entire mission. They make their way into the village, where the women are crying over the men who were killed. The sound of grief fills the air, making it impossible for the team to ignore what has happened. Tom tells the others to load the money bags onto donkeys while he goes to check on Santiago, who is speaking with the village chief. Santiago apologizes for the violence and the damage they have caused. He gives the chief money as payment for the donkeys, compensation for the grieving families, and something for the chief himself. He asks whether this settles the matter, and the chief agrees. As the team prepares to leave with the donkeys, a young boy steps into their path. He is the son of one of the dead farmers, and the pain in his face says more than any threat could. Tom looks at him and apologizes. The chief tells the boy to let them pass because the debt has been paid. The boy eventually moves aside, and the team continues forward with the money, but the weight they are carrying is no longer just cash. Farther along the trail, William asks if they truly paid for the damage. Tom tells him they gave $200 for the animals and $1 million for the families. William then asks who fired first. Tom lies and says he does not know. William does not believe the situation is that simple and warns the others that they need to be careful with themselves. Something between them has started to fracture. After traveling for a while, rain begins to fall, forcing the men to stop and rest. They still have about 2 days before they can reach the boat. They cannot risk lighting a fire because Loria's men may already be searching for them, and smoke would reveal their position immediately. In the darkness and cold, William says it feels like men like them are becoming extinct. Ben rejects that idea. To him, they are not dying out, they are warriors. Frankie, however, is still carrying the guilt of what happened in the village. He admits he fired too quickly and accepts that he killed one of the farmers. Ben reminds him that none of them are innocent. Once the shooting started, they all became part of it. Early the next morning, they continue moving through the wilderness. They cut through dense forest, cross streams, and push deeper into rough terrain until they reach an old smuggler's trail. The path climbs into steep mountain country, and the danger becomes obvious with every step. As they make their way along the narrow route, Frankie's donkey becomes nervous. The animal panics on the edge of the trail, loses its footing, and suddenly slips over the cliff. The bag of money tied to the donkey tears open as it falls, sending cash bursting into the air and scattering across the mountainside like loose paper in the wind. At least Frankie manages to stay on the trail, which is the only good thing about the moment. Ben lets out a laugh, trying to ease the tension, but Santiago is in no mood for jokes. Tom's first reaction is concern for the animal, but Santiago snaps at him, blaming him for the disaster they are now trapped in. In Santiago's mind, none of this would be happening if Tom had not insisted on taking every last bundle of money from Loria's house. If they had left with what they could safely carry, they would not be dragging a fortune across impossible terrain. Tom fires back, reminding Santiago that the whole reason they are here is because Santiago failed to take Loria down properly in the first place. The argument burns for a second, but Santiago chooses not to keep feeding it. He turns away and continues moving. Frankie quietly tells Tom to let it go, and the group pushes forward. Eventually, they reach a tight passage between the rocks where the mules can no longer pass through. The path is too narrow, and the drop beneath them is around 20 feet. With no other choice, they begin using ropes to pull the bags across one by one. While they wait, Santiago softens and apologizes to Tom for what he said earlier. Tom accepts it and admits that he also carries responsibility for how far things went. Neither man tries to dress it up anymore. The situation is what it is. Their only option now is to keep moving and make it to the boats. That night, the temperature drops hard. The cold becomes almost unbearable, and the men have nothing easy to burn. Ben takes out a bill and sets it on fire. For a moment, it feels absurd. Then slowly the others start doing the same, feeding handfuls of money into the flames just to stay warm. After risking everything for the cash, they are now burning it to survive. The irony hangs over them heavier than the smoke. The next morning they begin moving again, but almost immediately, a gunshot cracks through the air and forces everyone into cover. A bullet grazes Ben's shoulder, and more shots follow. The team reacts quickly, trying to identify where the fire is coming from. Santiago moves into position while the others confirm angles and start flanking the shooter. Tom spots one of the snipers from a distance and manages to take him out, but before anyone can feel relief, another shot rings out. This one hits Tom in the head. Everything stops. Santiago kills the second attacker, while Ben rushes to Tom's side, desperate to help him. But there is nothing left to do. Tom is gone. Ben breaks down, crying in shock and disbelief. The others stand frozen, devastated by how suddenly they have lost one of their own. William, still trying to keep the group alive, quietly says they need to wrap Tom's body and continue moving. Ben lashes out, accusing him of being cold and heartless. William snaps back, blaming Ben for lighting the fire the night before and possibly giving away their location. The grief turns into anger, and the two nearly come to blows before Santiago and Frankie pull them apart. Santiago then reveals the truth. The fire did not expose them. The shooter was the son of the farmer Tom killed earlier. The boy had been following them for days, waiting for the chance to take revenge. He wanted Tom specifically because Tom had been responsible for his father's death. Santiago insists they cannot stay there any longer. They have to leave and they are taking the money with them. In his mind, Tom's family deserves that money now, and after everything they have endured, so do the rest of them. But carrying Tom's body along with the remaining cash makes the journey painfully slow. Every step becomes heavier than the last. By the time they are close to the ocean, Ben reveals another problem. They are 5 days late for the boatman. There is no guarantee the boat is still waiting. William scans the coast with binoculars but sees nothing. Someone has to go down and check. Ben volunteers. Santiago tells him to look out for the Hydro Pro, the boat they are supposed to meet. While Ben is gone, the others sit with the silence and the weight of everything they have done. They talk about the people they have killed over the years, not with pride, but with the tired voices of men who have carried too much for too long. The guilt is no longer something they can ignore. Ben eventually returns with good news. The boat is still there. He has already given the captain half of the agreed payment, hoping it will convince him to wait, but there is bad news too. Ben did not go fully into town, but from what he saw, whoever controls the area has people searching for them. There are a few boats and around 20 heavily armed teenagers. The next town is more than 100 miles south, and Loria's associates have probably locked down the surrounding region. Santiago suggests pushing straight through them, but the others immediately reject the idea. He argues that Tom died for the money, but Ben corrects him with a painful truth. Tom died because of the money. William pulls Santiago aside and speaks to him calmly. Santiago admits he regrets ever taking the job. He cannot bring himself to kill kids just to escape with cash. William reminds him that the only thing that matters now is getting Tom home. Finally, Santiago comes up with a new plan. They will fill their backpacks with whatever money they can carry and throw the rest off the cliff. The snow will bury it soon enough, and no one will ever recover it. One by one, the others agree. The fortune that once looked like freedom has become a curse they can no longer drag with them. That night, they reach the ocean. Ben goes ahead to meet the captain, while the remaining 3 continue toward the escape route. On the way, they run into a teenage soldier. The boy is terrified, holding them at gunpoint and ordering them to stop. Santiago tries to talk him down, but the boy radios for backup. The team quickly moves, taking the radio and seizing the truck. Before they leave, William hands the boy a thick bundle of cash and tells him to get away from this life while he still can. They climb into the truck and drive off. Frankie argues that they should have killed the boy because he has seen their faces, but Santiago refuses. They are done taking lives. No more. Moments later, more armed men appear in their path. Even then, Santiago refuses to start shooting. They keep moving, pushing through the danger until they finally reach the boat, where Ben and the captain are waiting. The group boards quickly and escapes by the narrowest margin. Later, they arrive in a city and meet with a banker to divide what remains. After everything, they still have more than $5 million. Each surviving man would receive a little over $1 million, while Tom's share will be placed into a trust. The banker gives them the papers to sign. Ben looks at the money and makes his choice first. He gives up his share and puts it into Tom's fund. Then, one after another, the rest of the men do the same. After losing their brother, the money no longer feels like a prize. It feels empty. Outside, the men embrace, holding on for a moment before going their separate ways. Santiago tells William that he plans to look for Ivana. Before leaving, he asks William to remind Molly and Tess who Tom really was, not just how he died, but the man he had been before everything fell apart. They hug one final time. Then William hands Santiago a folded piece of paper, leaving him with one last piece of the story before they part ways. Triple Frontier is the kind of movie that sounds powerful before you even press play. 5 former Special Forces soldiers, a hidden fortune inside a drug lord's jungle compound. A mission that begins with military precision and slowly collapses under the weight of greed. On paper, this is the kind of premise that should explode with tension. It has danger, moral conflict, brotherhood, survival, betrayal, and the haunting question of what happens to men trained for war when the war is over, and civilian life gives them nothing in return. That is why the frustration around Triple Frontier is not that it has no potential. The frustration is that it has too much potential, and the film only uses part of it. You can feel the stronger movie hiding underneath the surface. There are moments where everything clicks. The cast has presence. The setting has atmosphere. The mission has weight. The idea of men who once served with discipline slowly becoming corrupted by money is genuinely interesting. The film understands that greed is not always loud. Sometimes it begins as justification. Sometimes it sounds like, "We earned this." Sometimes it hides behind years of sacrifice, unpaid loyalty, and the bitterness of being forgotten after service. That is the real hook of the movie. These men are not ordinary criminals. They are trained, experienced, and capable. They know how to move, how to plan, how to survive, and how to kill if necessary. But the film places them in a situation where their greatest skills become dangerous, because once the mission stops being about control and starts being about money, their discipline begins to break apart. And that should have made Triple Frontier unforgettable, but the film keeps opening doors that it never fully walks through. It introduces the emotional damage of former soldiers trying to survive normal life, but it does not explore that pain deeply enough. It hints at corruption, politics, military exploitation, and the strange emptiness waiting for men after combat, but those ideas remain scattered in the background. It builds a story about brotherhood, but sometimes relies more on the actor's natural chemistry than on fully developed character writing. So instead of becoming a sharp, layered thriller, Triple Frontier often feels like an almost movie. Almost great, almost profound, almost brutal enough, almost emotionally devastating, almost the film its premise promised. That is what makes it so interesting to talk about. This is not a completely empty action movie. It has craft, it has tension, it has strong locations, a watchable ensemble, and a concept that immediately pulls you in. But the more the movie goes on, the more you feel it avoiding the deeper version of itself. A film like this should make the audience feel the cost of every decision. Every extra bag of money should feel heavier. Every argument between the men should reveal something broken inside them. Every mistake should feel like the result of pressure, pride, and desperation. And sometimes the movie does reach that level, but just as often, it settles for familiar genre movement. The team assembles, the job begins, the plan goes wrong, the escape becomes harder, and the ending arrives with more drama than true emotional force. That is why Triple Frontier divides viewers so strongly. Some will see a solid, gritty Netflix thriller with a great cast and enough suspense to make it worth watching. Others will see a film that had the cast, the concept, and the atmosphere to become something exceptional, but never sharpened its ideas enough to leave a lasting impact. And honestly, both reactions make sense, because Triple Frontier is not a disaster. It is too polished for that. It is not lazy in every department. It has scenes that work. It has a premise that works. It has actors who know how to carry silence, tension, and masculine regret, but it also has a screenplay that keeps pulling back when it should dig deeper. The result is a thriller that feels loaded with possibility, but not fully armed with purpose. It wants to be a heist film. It wants to be a survival drama. It wants to be a story about greed. It wants to be a critique of how veterans are used and discarded. It wants to be a muscular action movie about loyalty under pressure. But wanting all of those things is not the same as mastering them. And that is the central problem with Triple Frontier. It has the bones of a great film, but not always the dramatic muscle to support them. It gives us a dangerous mission, but not enough character depth. It gives us moral conflict, but not enough complexity. It gives us brotherhood, but not always enough emotional payoff. It gives us spectacle, but not always enough surprise. So when people call it wasted potential, that does not mean there is nothing good here. It means the good parts are exactly what make the flaws more visible. Because the stronger version of Triple Frontier is easy to imagine. You can see it in the jungle. You can see it in the raid. You can see it in the way these men look at the money and slowly begin to change. You can see it in the quiet moments where their loyalty starts to crack under pressure. The film had everything it needed to be a brutal, unforgettable study of greed and brotherhood. Instead, it became a solid but incomplete thriller, entertaining in pieces, impressive in moments, but always carrying the shadow of the better movie it could have been. Triple Frontier begins with one of the oldest promises in the action thriller playbook. One last job, and that phrase matters, because the moment a movie gives us a group of hardened men returning for one final mission, we already understand the emotional contract. These are not beginners. These are not reckless amateurs looking for excitement. These are people with history, training, damage, and unfinished business. They have survived war, they have served together, and now they are being pulled back into danger by the one thing civilian life has not given them. A Way Out, that is the foundation of Triple Frontier. The film gathers 5 former Special Forces operatives and places them around a mission that feels simple on the surface. There is a drug lord hiding deep in South America. There is a fortune stored inside his jungle compound. The authorities have failed to reach him properly. The money is sitting there, guarded but vulnerable. And for men with this level of training, the job is not impossible. It is risky, yes, but it is also exactly the kind of operation they were built to execute. That is where the movie finds its first real tension, because the setup is not just about robbing a criminal. It is about how easily a mission can be made to sound moral when the target is evil enough. They are not stealing from an innocent person. They are not robbing a bank full of ordinary people's savings. They are going after a drug lord, a man whose wealth represents corruption, violence, and exploitation. So the robbery begins to feel almost clean in their minds. Take out a dangerous man, remove his money, walk away rich. Everyone wins, but that is exactly how the trap is built. The one last job formula works because it always begins with control. The team believes they can manage the variables. They know the timing. They know the location. They know the security pattern. They know the exit route. They know who they are bringing into the operation. And most importantly, they trust themselves. These are men who have lived through combat. They have operated under pressure. They have built their identities around discipline and execution. So when the plan is first presented, it carries the thrill of competence. The audience watches men who know what they are doing. There is a certain pleasure in seeing a team come together, each person carrying a different skill set, each one returning to a version of himself that civilian life has pushed into the background. The film understands the appeal of that dynamic. The reunion has weight because these men are not just colleagues. They are old brothers in arms, people who share a language built from danger, trust, and survival. But underneath that professional surface, there is something unstable. The men are not returning to this mission from positions of strength. They are not wealthy. They are not settled. They are not at peace. Some are financially strained. Some are emotionally worn down. Some seem trapped in lives that feel smaller than what they were trained for. That is what gives the setup more bite than a standard heist premise. The mission does not simply tempt them with money. It tempts them with recognition, purpose, and the feeling that their skills still matter. And that is why the drug money becomes more than cash. It becomes compensation. It becomes revenge. It becomes escape. It becomes proof that all those years of sacrifice can finally mean something tangible. The film's setup is strongest when it shows how the men talk themselves into crossing the line. At first, the job can be dressed up as justice. The drug lord deserves to fall. The money is dirty. The system is broken. The team has been used and discarded. Why should they walk away with nothing while men like this live surrounded by walls of cash? That reasoning is dangerous because it is not completely absurd. The film gives the characters just enough emotional logic for the audience to understand why they say yes. They are not simply greedy from the first moment. Their greed grows out of disappointment, pride, and resentment. They want to believe this is not just a robbery. They want to believe it is a correction. That is the power of the one last job structure. It never begins as a disaster. It begins as a solution. For Pope, the mission is built from intelligence and opportunity. He knows the target. He knows the terrain. He understands the money. He has the access point through his informant. He is the one who sees the possibility and brings the others back into the fold. In his mind, this is the job that can solve multiple problems at once, remove a dangerous figure, reward his old team, and end a long, frustrating pursuit. For the rest of the men, the offer lands differently. They have to be convinced. They understand the risk. They know this is not an official operation. They know there will be no flag, no medal, no government protection if things collapse. But the money keeps sitting there in the conversation like a loaded weapon. The more they imagine it, the more the impossible starts to feel reasonable. And once they agree, the film shifts into that familiar but satisfying rhythm. Planning the mission, studying the target, entering dangerous territory, and preparing for a clean strike. This is where Triple Frontier knows exactly what kind of movie it is borrowing from. The team assembly, the tactical briefing, the narrow time window, the hidden fortune, the promise of a clean exit, these are classic heist ingredients. The difference is that the movie coats them in military realism rather than slick criminal glamour. These men are not stylish thieves in tailored suits. They are former soldiers trying to turn combat experience into financial freedom. That makes the setup feel rougher, heavier, and more morally compromised. Because the job is not glamorous, it is sweaty, tense, and dangerous. The compound is not a casino or a vault. It is a fortified home in the jungle. The target is not just money. It is a man. The team is not merely stealing. They are entering a place where violence is almost guaranteed. So from the beginning, the film places the audience in a space where action and ethics are tangled together. And that is what makes the early promise of Triple Frontier so strong. The story is simple, but it has enough pressure behind it to work. A group of men who feel abandoned by the world are offered a chance to take what they think they deserve. A criminal fortune becomes their ticket out. A mission that begins as strategy becomes a test of character. And the one last job formula, familiar as it is, still carries danger because we know these stories never stay clean. The phrase, one last job, always contains a warning. It tells us someone is lying to himself. It tells us the plan will change. It tells us the reward will cost more than expected. It tells us that men who believe they are in control are about to discover how quickly control disappears. That is the real setup of Triple Frontier, not just soldiers robbing a drug lord, not just an action mission in the jungle, but a group of damaged professionals stepping into a situation where their discipline, loyalty, and morality will all be tested by the same thing. The promise of money big enough to make them forget who they thought they were. Triple Frontier is not built on surprise. That becomes clear very early. The film is working with a familiar collection of genre pieces. The old team coming back together, the dangerous final mission, the criminal fortune, the strict plan, the hidden complication, the greed that poisons the operation, and the escape route that becomes more dangerous than the actual robbery. None of this is new, but the real question is not whether the story is familiar. Familiarity is not automatically a weakness. Some of the best thrillers ever made are built from ingredients audiences already recognize. What matters is whether the movie can take those ingredients and give them enough pressure, style, character, and consequence to make them feel alive again. And that is where Triple Frontier becomes complicated. Because for a while, the formula works. There is an immediate pull to the setup. A group of former soldiers are brought together for a mission that exists outside the law. The target is powerful enough to justify the danger. The money is large enough to bend everyone's morality. The team has enough history to make their reunion interesting. The environment is hostile enough to suggest that even if they succeed, leaving will be another battle entirely. These are reliable thriller mechanics, and the film knows how to activate them. You can feel the story moving through its expected stages. First comes the recruitment. We meet the men in civilian life, no longer operating with the purpose they once had. Then comes the pitch, where the job is presented as both justice and opportunity. Then comes the planning, where the mission looks precise enough to succeed. Then comes the heist, where discipline and timing matter. And then inevitably comes the collapse. That structure is almost ritualistic. And if you have seen enough heist films, enough military thrillers, enough one last score stories, you can sense the shape of the movie before it fully reveals itself. You know the plan will not go cleanly. You know someone will want more than they agreed to take. You know the money will become too heavy, literally and morally. You know the team's brotherhood will be tested. You know the escape will strip away their confidence until the mission becomes less about wealth and more about survival. The movie does not hide these turns. In many ways, it leans directly into them. That is why some viewers find Triple Frontier satisfying as a straightforward genre film. It gives you exactly what the premise promises. Trained men, a dangerous target, a violent operation, a massive haul, and a long, punishing aftermath. It is clean enough to follow. It does not bury the audience under complicated twists or confusing heist mechanics. The stakes are simple. The goal is clear. The danger keeps escalating. There is value in that kind of clarity. Unlike some heist films that become obsessed with clever reveals and hidden plans, Triple Frontier is not really interested in tricking the audience. It is more interested in watching a plan rot from the inside. The tension does not come from wondering whether the characters are secretly smarter than everyone else. It comes from watching them become less smart once the money enters the room. That is the film's best use of familiar structure. The predictable shape becomes a moral trap. We know greed is going to ruin them, but the film asks us to watch how it happens. We see the moment when the original plan stops being enough. We see professionalism give way to temptation. We see the team move from controlled operators to desperate men calculating how much they can carry, how much they can risk, and how much they are willing to lose. But predictability becomes a problem when the movie does not deepen what we already expect. And that is the main criticism. The story follows its genre path so closely that it rarely feels genuinely surprising. The one last job setup plays like a road we have traveled before. The greedy turn is expected. The mission going wrong is expected. The survival struggle is expected. Even the emotional fractures between the men often feel like part of the formula, rather than discoveries that emerge naturally from fully developed characters. That is where the film starts to feel ordinary. It has the cast of something major. It has the locations of something cinematic. It has the themes of something heavier. But its story often moves with the familiarity of a movie that is checking off known beats. The problem is not that Triple Frontier uses genre conventions. The problem is that it does not always reshape them with enough force. When it borrows from the heist film, it gives us the planning and execution, but not always the sharpness or invention that makes a heist feel unforgettable. When it borrows from the survival thriller, it gives us danger and exhaustion, but not always the emotional desperation needed to make the journey feel devastating. When it borrows from veteran drama, it gives us resentment and broken civilian lives, but not always the depth to make those wounds truly land. So the film becomes a strange mixture. Familiar enough to be accessible, but not fresh enough to be exceptional. You can see echoes of other stories inside it. There is the old moral warning about greed corrupting men who think they are stronger than temptation. There is the men on a mission adventure where professionals enter hostile territory and lose control. There is the gritty cartel thriller, the jungle extraction movie, the post-war brotherhood drama, and the survival tale where the prize becomes a curse. All of these pieces fit together, but fitting together is not the same as becoming something new. At its strongest, Triple Frontier uses familiar genre material to create momentum. The audience understands the rules immediately, so the film can move with confidence. We know who these men are, what they want, and why the job is dangerous. That simplicity gives the early sections a direct, muscular energy. At its weakest, that same familiarity drains tension from the story. Because once the film begins moving toward its inevitable consequences, it sometimes feels like we are waiting for the next expected problem to arrive rather than being shocked by the character's choices. The story becomes less about surprise and more about execution, and execution is exactly where the film is uneven. Some sequences are tense and well-staged. Others feel like they should hit harder than they do. Some character moments suggest a more complicated film underneath. Others feel too thin, too obvious, or too familiar to leave much impact. That is why the predictability of Triple Frontier is not a simple flaw. It is both part of the appeal and part of the disappointment. For viewers who want a clean, gritty, easy-to-follow action thriller, the familiar structure may be enough. The movie gives them a strong cast, a dangerous mission, beautiful locations, and the pleasure of watching a plan fall apart. But for viewers expecting something sharper, deeper, or more original, the same structure becomes frustrating. The film keeps approaching greatness, then retreats into recognizable territory. And that is the tension at the heart of this topic. Triple Frontier is built from proven genre pieces, but it rarely makes those pieces feel newly dangerous. It understands the shape of a heist thriller. It understands the rhythm of a survival story. It understands the moral language of greed. But understanding a formula is not the same as transcending it. The result is a movie that feels solid, watchable, and sometimes gripping, but also familiar from the first move to the last. It is not unpredictable enough to shock you, not deep enough to fully haunt you, not stylish enough to reinvent the genre, not careless enough to completely dismiss. It sits somewhere in the middle. A polished thriller assembled from parts we recognize, carried by enough craft to stay engaging, but held back by a story that too often feels like it is arriving exactly where we expected it to go. In a heist thriller, the story usually lives or dies in three stages: the planning, the execution, and the fallout. And what makes Triple Frontier interesting is that it understands the first two stages much better than the third. The planning section works because it gives the film structure. It slows everything down just enough for us to understand the mission. The target is located, the team is gathered, the route is discussed, the timing matters, the risks are clear. This is where the movie begins to build that professional rhythm of a military operation. These men are not supposed to be ordinary thieves. They are trained operators, and the early part of the film wants us to feel that training in the way they think, move, and prepare. There is tension in that preparation because the plan feels possible. Not easy, not safe, but possible, and that is important. A good heist movie needs the audience to believe in the plan before it breaks. We need to understand why these men think they can pull it off. We need to see enough competence to trust them. Triple Frontier does that well in its early movement. The film lays out the job with enough clarity that the audience can follow the danger without getting lost in unnecessary complication. Then comes the execution, and this is where the film is often at its strongest. The raid has weight. It is tense, focused, and controlled. The characters move like men who know how to operate under pressure. The sequence has a clean sense of geography, timing, and risk. There is a sharpness to watching them enter the compound, search for the money, adjust to complications, and push deeper into the operation. For a while, Triple Frontier becomes exactly the film it promised to be. The danger is immediate, the objective is clear, the team has purpose, the pressure keeps rising, and then the money appears. That is the turning point. Not just because the team finds more than expected, but because the film's entire energy changes. What began as a tactical operation becomes a moral stress test. The mission is no longer about whether they can get in and get out. It becomes about how much they can carry, how long they are willing to stay, and how quickly discipline can collapse when the reward becomes too massive to ignore. This is where the movie has one of its strongest ideas. The plan does not fall apart because the men are incapable. It falls apart because they are tempted. Their training can prepare them for bullets, security, timing, terrain, and extraction, but it cannot protect them from greed. And once greed enters the mission, every second becomes heavier. That part works beautifully in concept. The problem is what happens after. Once the heist is over and the film moves into the fallout, Triple Frontier starts to lose some of the force it built so carefully. The escape should feel like the true emotional and physical punishment for everything these men have done. It should tighten the movie. It should make the money feel cursed. It should turn every mile into a consequence, and sometimes it does. But just as often, the fallout feels less convincing than the setup. The survival section takes the characters through helicopters, mountains, villages, mules, lost money, exhaustion, and violent consequences. On paper, that sounds brutal. It should be the part of the movie where the story becomes more intense, more desperate, and more psychologically revealing. But for many viewers, this is where the film begins to stretch credibility. Because the men who seemed so disciplined during the planning and raid begin making choices that feel strangely careless. They misjudge the weight. They ignore limits. They keep clinging to money when survival should clearly matter more. They drift from elite professionals into desperate men stumbling through one problem after another. Now, to be fair, that is partly the point. Greed is supposed to make them stupid. The money is supposed to distort their judgment. The mission is supposed to expose the gap between who they think they are and who they become under pressure. But the film does not always make that collapse feel psychologically precise. Sometimes it feels like character breakdown. Other times it feels like screenplay mechanics. The movie needs the escape to become worse, so the men make decisions that push it there. That difference matters. When the planning and execution work, the film feels grounded. We believe in the team's abilities. We understand the danger. We feel the pressure of time and space. The tension comes from watching skilled men operate in a hostile environment, but in the fallout, the tension becomes more uneven. Instead of feeling like a natural unraveling, parts of the journey feel like a series of escalating obstacles placed in their path. The helicopter problem, the mountain crossing, the village confrontation, the long walk toward extraction. Each moment has potential, but not every moment lands with equal dramatic force. The result is a film with a strange imbalance. The robbery is cleaner than the escape. The setup is sharper than the aftermath. The mission is more exciting before it becomes more ambitious. That is not automatically a bad thing. In fact, a heist film can become even better when the aftermath is messier than the plan. The fallout should be where the characters are stripped bare. It should reveal who is selfish, who is loyal, who panics, who adapts, and who breaks. Triple Frontier tries to do that. It wants the escape to become a moral reckoning. It wants the men to realize that the real enemy is not just the cartel or the terrain, but the weight of what they chose to carry. It wants every bag of cash to become a symbol of their failure to walk away, and that is a strong idea. But the emotional payoff does not always match the idea. The film gives us physical hardship, but not always enough inner revelation. It gives us conflict, but not always enough depth behind the conflict. It gives us consequence, but sometimes the consequence feels more dramatic than earned. That is why the planning and execution stand out more clearly. Those sections have precision. They know what they are. They use the team's background effectively. They build suspense through logistics and timing. They allow the film to function as a tight military heist thriller. The fallout, by contrast, wants to become something larger, a survival drama, a morality tale, a story about brotherhood, greed, guilt, and the cost of believing that money can repair a broken life. That ambition is admirable. But ambition requires control, and the third act does not always have enough of it. Still, even when the fallout disappoints, it is not empty. There are moments where the film finds the right image. Men carrying impossible wealth through impossible terrain, slowly realizing that the prize they risked everything for is becoming a burden. There is something powerful in that. The money stops looking like freedom and starts looking like punishment. That is the tragedy the movie keeps reaching for. A group of professionals enter the mission believing they can master the situation. They plan it like soldiers. They execute it like soldiers. But once they cross the line from operation to greed, the world stops obeying their plan. And maybe that is the most interesting thing about Triple Frontier. The heist is not really the test. The escape is. Anyone can believe in discipline before temptation arrives. Anyone can talk about loyalty before survival is at stake. Anyone can claim they know their limits before hundreds of millions of dollars are sitting in front of them. The planning shows us who these men used to be. The execution shows us what they can still do. But the fallout shows us what they become when the mission stops being clean, when the money becomes heavier than their training, and when the fantasy of one last job turns into the reality of consequences. That is why this section of the film is both fascinating and frustrating. It contains the movie's deepest idea, but also some of its weakest storytelling. It has the potential to turn a familiar heist into a brutal character study, but it never fully completes that transformation. So Triple Frontier succeeds most when it is preparing and executing the job. It becomes less steady when it tries to live with the damage afterward. And in a story about greed, that is a serious problem, because the fallout should not feel like the weaker part of the movie. It should feel like the bill finally coming due. In Triple Frontier, greed is not just a theme. It is the engine of the entire movie. The mission begins with discipline. It begins with information, timing, training, and control. These men are not supposed to be reckless criminals. They are former special forces operators, men who understand risk, command, and consequence. They know how to enter dangerous places, how to read a situation, how to move as a unit, and how to keep emotion out of the mission. But then the money appears, and once the money appears, the movie changes. At first, the job can be justified. That is what makes the greed interesting. The team is not walking into an ordinary home and stealing from ordinary people. They are targeting a drug lord, a man whose fortune is already soaked in corruption. In their minds, the money is dirty. The system has failed. The authorities cannot reach him. These former soldiers have sacrificed years of their lives, and now they are standing in front of more wealth than they could ever earn honestly. So the temptation does not arrive looking like evil. It arrives looking like fairness. That is the dangerous part. Greed in Triple Frontier is not presented as simple hunger for luxury. It grows out of resentment. It grows out of fatigue. These are men who feel used, underpaid, and discarded. They have served, fought, bled, and survived, only to return to civilian lives that feel small, unstable, and unrewarding. So when they see that fortune, they do not only see cash. They see compensation. They see escape. They see justice. They see proof that maybe, finally, the world owes them something back, and that is where the moral collapse begins. Because once they convince themselves they deserve the money, every bad decision becomes easier to defend. Staying longer becomes reasonable. Taking more than planned becomes reasonable. Ignoring the limits becomes reasonable. Risking the exit route becomes reasonable. The mission was supposed to be precise, but greed slowly changes the meaning of precision. It is no longer about getting out safely. It becomes about getting out with as much as possible. The money becomes the real commander, not Pope, not Redfly, not the plan, the money. It dictates their timing. It changes their priorities. It makes them forget the difference between a successful operation and a suicidal one. The more they take, the less control they have. And that is the irony at the center of the film. The fortune that promises freedom becomes the thing that traps them. That is why the physical weight of the money matters. The bags are not just props. They are consequences. Every bundle they carry makes escape harder. Every extra load slows them down. Every decision to keep more money increases the danger. The film turns greed into something visible and exhausting. It is not an abstract flaw. It is weight. It fills vehicles. It burdens helicopters. It has to be dragged, lifted, hidden, burned, dropped, and abandoned. The money becomes heavier than their morality. And the deeper the men move into the escape, the clearer it becomes that the fortune is not saving them. It is destroying the very things that made them powerful in the first place. Their discipline begins to crack. Their brotherhood becomes strained. Their tactical judgment weakens. Their confidence turns into panic. Their shared purpose fractures under the question that keeps returning again and again. How much is enough? That question is what Triple Frontier is really about. Because at the start, the answer seems obvious. Enough is a few million each. Enough is one clean operation. Enough is a future where they no longer have to struggle. But once the walls open and the true size of the fortune is revealed, enough disappears. The number expands, the goal moves. The plan bends around the possibility of more. That is how greed works in the film. It does not announce itself as madness. It simply keeps moving the line. Take a little more, stay a little longer. Carry one more bag, push the helicopter a little harder, risk one more mile. And by the time the men realize what has happened, the mission has already changed shape. It is no longer a heist. It is a punishment. This is especially clear through Tom Redfly Davis. His desperation makes him one of the most important figures in the story. He is not greedy in a cartoonish way. He is tired. He is financially pressured. He is humiliated by the life waiting for him back home. He looks at the money and sees a way to correct everything that has gone wrong. That makes his choices understandable, even when they become dangerous. He represents the film's sharpest moral warning. Greed is most powerful when it attaches itself to real pain. If Tom were simply selfish, he would be less interesting. But because his greed comes from failure, fear, and a need to provide, the film gives his downfall more emotional texture. He does not just want wealth. He wants dignity. He wants control. He wants to feel like all his years of sacrifice were not wasted. but the more desperately he clings to the money, the more he loses the very discipline that once defined him. And he is not alone. The whole team is infected by the same temptation in different degrees. Some resist more than others. Some recognize the danger earlier. Some try to hold the group together, but nobody is untouched by it. That is what gives the film its tension. Greed does not divide the team immediately. It spreads gradually, quietly, almost logically, until the men are making choices that would have seemed absurd before the mission began. That slow corruption is one of the strongest ideas in Triple Frontier. The film understands that money can become a moral fog. It makes intelligent people reckless. It makes loyal people suspicious. It makes trained people sloppy. It makes survival feel secondary to possession. The men are not defeated because they lack skill. They are defeated because they cannot walk away when walking away would save them. And that is a brutal idea. Because the movie keeps asking whether these men are carrying the money, or whether the money is carrying them toward ruin. The more they try to protect it, the more exposed they become. The more they sacrifice for it, the less valuable it seems. The more they fight to keep it, the more it turns from reward into curse. By the time they are dragging it through mountains and losing pieces of it along the way, the fantasy of wealth has become almost grotesque. What was supposed to buy freedom now demands obedience. That is why greed works better than the villain in the film. The drug lord may be the target, and the cartel may be the external threat, but the true antagonist is internal. It is the voice inside each man telling him that the next risk is worth it, that the next compromise can be survived, that one more bad choice will not destroy everything. But in Triple Frontier, every compromise has a cost. The film's strongest moral image is not simply men stealing money. It is men slowly realizing that they have mistaken a burden for a prize. The money does not make them stronger. It exposes them. It reveals who is desperate, who is stubborn, who is loyal, who is practical, and who cannot let go. And that is what gives the movie its most powerful dramatic idea. The mission fails not because the men cannot fight. It fails because they cannot stop wanting. They can defeat guards. They can survive gunfire. They can navigate hostile terrain. They can improvise under pressure. But they cannot defeat the temptations sitting in front of them. That is the tragedy of Triple Frontier. These are men trained to carry impossible weight, but the one weight they are not prepared for is greed. It starts as a promise. It becomes a justification. Then it becomes a burden. And finally, it becomes the force that strips the mission down to its ugliest truth. They did not just steal money from a dangerous man. They allowed that money to steal something from them. What makes Triple Frontier more interesting than a simple heist movie is not just that these men steal. It is how they convince themselves that stealing is reasonable. That is where the film's moral tension begins. These are not ordinary criminals walking into the story with no code. They are former soldiers. Their identities are built around discipline, loyalty, sacrifice, and service. They have spent their lives inside systems where orders matter, rules matter, and the mission matters more than the individual. So when they cross the line, the real drama is not only the crime itself. The real drama is the argument they create inside their own heads. They do not begin by saying, "We are thieves." They begin by saying, "We have earned this." That difference is everything. The target is a drug lord. The money is dirty. The system is corrupt. The authorities are ineffective. These men have risked their lives again and again, only to return home and discover that sacrifice does not pay the bills. So the robbery is dressed in a kind of moral disguise. It becomes easy for them to frame the mission as justice, not greed. They are not taking from the innocent. They are taking from someone worse than them. And that is how self-justification works. It does not erase the crime. It makes the crime feel acceptable. In their minds, the mission becomes almost clean. Remove a dangerous man. Take the money he should never have had. Reward the men who actually know how to do the job. Walk away with enough to finally live with dignity. On the surface, that logic sounds practical, maybe even fair. But underneath it, something darker is already growing. Because the moment they decide the rules no longer apply to them, they become vulnerable to everything they think they can control. That is the moral collapse at the center of Triple Frontier. It does not happen all at once. It is gradual. It begins with frustration, then it becomes entitlement, then it becomes compromise, then compromise becomes momentum. And by the time the men recognize how far they have gone, the mission has already changed them. The film is strongest when it shows that integrity rarely collapses in one dramatic moment. More often, it erodes through a series of small permissions. Just this once. Only because the target deserves it. Only because nobody else can do it. Only because we were never properly rewarded. Only because this is the last time. That phrase, "the last time," is one of the most dangerous lies in stories like this. It gives the characters permission to violate their own code, because they believe the violation has an expiration date. They think they can step outside their morality for one mission, collect the reward, and then return to themselves unchanged. But Triple Frontier understands that crossing the line is not a temporary costume. Once the line is crossed, every decision after it becomes easier to bend. At first, the men justify the mission by focusing on the target. The drug lord is dangerous, his fortune is criminal, his death or removal feels like a public good, but once the money is in front of them, the justification shifts. It is no longer about justice. It is about how much they can carry, how long they can stay, how much risk they can tolerate, how many consequences they are willing to create. That shift is crucial, because the film slowly removes the moral cover from the operation. The men may have entered the mission telling themselves that they were correcting an injustice, but the deeper they go, the more obvious it becomes that the money has become the real objective. Not justice, not service, not the greater good, money. And once money becomes the mission, their old values start breaking apart. Discipline becomes impatience, loyalty becomes tension, courage becomes recklessness, purpose becomes possession. That is where the movie's title becomes almost symbolic. These men are operating in a borderland, not just geographically, but morally. They are standing between soldier and criminal, brotherhood and self-interest, justice and greed. They keep trying to convince themselves they are still on the right side of that border, but every choice pushes them further across it. The tragedy is that they know better. That is what separates them from amateurs. They understand consequences. They know plans fail. They know overloading an escape route is dangerous. They know time windows matter. They know emotion can compromise judgment. They have likely seen men die because someone made a selfish or careless decision. And still they do it. That is what makes the moral collapse feel so sharp. It is not ignorance. It is willful blindness. They know the mission is becoming compromised, but the fantasy of reward keeps overpowering the reality of risk. The money gives them a reason to ignore their own training, and that is the most damning thing the film says about them. Their skills do not save them from corruption. Their experience does not save them from temptation. Their brotherhood does not completely save them from selfishness. In fact, their history together makes the collapse even more painful because they keep pulling one another deeper into it. Nobody wants to be the man who walks away. Nobody wants to admit that the mission has become too dangerous. Nobody wants to be the weak link. Pride and loyalty become tangled together until the group keeps moving forward even when the smarter choice would be to stop. This is where self-justification becomes collective. One man's greed can be challenged. A group's shared delusion is much harder to break. They reinforce one another. They rationalize together. They keep adjusting the moral boundaries of the mission because everyone has already invested too much to turn back. The more dangerous the escape becomes, the more they need the money to matter. If they abandon it too early, then what was all the violence for? What was the risk for? What did they become criminals for? So they keep carrying it, even when it slows them down, even when it threatens the team, even when it begins to look less like salvation and more like punishment. That is the cruelest part of the movie's moral logic. The more they lose, the more they cling to the thing causing the loss. The money must remain valuable because admitting otherwise would force them to face the truth. They did not simply make one bad decision. They built an entire mission on a lie. The lie was that they could steal without becoming thieves. The lie was that they could kill without carrying the stain of it. The lie was that they could betray their code once and still return home as the same men, but the fallout proves otherwise. Every stage of the escape strips away another layer of their self-image. They are no longer clean professionals executing a precise operation. They are frightened, overloaded, morally compromised men trying to survive the consequences of a choice they told themselves was justified. And this is where Triple Frontier finds its most compelling human question. What happens when men who once believed in service begin to believe they are owed something? That feeling of being owed is dangerous because it can transform pain into permission. It can make a person feel that normal ethics no longer apply. These men are not wrong to feel abandoned. They are not wrong to feel underpaid or forgotten. The film gives that frustration real weight. But the tragedy is that they turn a legitimate wound into a justification for corruption. That is the moral fall, not that they want better lives, not that they are angry, not that they feel betrayed by the world. The fall is that they let those feelings excuse what they know is wrong, and once they do, the mission becomes a mirror. Every obstacle reflects the cost of their compromise. Every lost bag, every argument, every dangerous mile forces them closer to the truth they keep avoiding. They were not only fighting the cartel, the terrain, or the consequences of bad planning. They were fighting the version of themselves that the money exposed. That is why the moral collapse in Triple Frontier matters. It is not about heroes suddenly becoming villains. It is about decent or disciplined men discovering how quickly their code can bend when desperation gives greed a noble-sounding excuse. And that is far more unsettling. Because the film is not saying these men were always corrupt. It is saying corruption can begin with a story you tell yourself, a story about sacrifice, a story about fairness, a story about what you deserve. A story about how this one wrong thing is different from all the other wrong things because this time, the world owes you. That is the danger at the heart of Triple Frontier. The men do not lose their integrity because they fail to understand right and wrong. They lose it because, for one mission, they convince themselves they are special enough to stand outside it. At first, Triple Frontier looks like a heist thriller. The movie gives us the familiar ingredients. A dangerous target, a hidden fortune, a skilled team, a narrow window of time, and a plan that depends on precision. The goal is clear. Get in, take the money, get out. That is the promise the film makes in its first half. But the real movie begins when that promise breaks, because Triple Frontier is not only about the robbery is almost the doorway. The deeper story begins after the money is taken, when the mission stops being about strategy and becomes about survival. That shift is one of the most important things about the film. It starts with men who believe they can control the situation, and then slowly places them in a world where control becomes impossible. The heist section has structure. It has timing, it has a clean objective. The men know what they are supposed to do. They know where they are going. They know how long they have. They know the risk. Even when complications appear, the operation still feels like something built by professionals. But once they leave the compound, the film changes shape. Suddenly, the problem is not just enemies with guns. It is distance, weight, terrain, weather, exhaustion, panic, human error. The money itself becomes the obstacle. What looked like freedom inside the walls of the drug lord's house becomes a physical burden outside it. Every bag they carry makes escape harder. Every extra dollar becomes another reason the plan might fail. That is when Triple Frontier transforms from a heist movie into a survival journey. And that transformation is fascinating because it changes the meaning of the mission. During the heist, the money is the reward. During the escape, the money becomes the punishment. It slows them down, divides their attention, and forces them into choices where survival and wealth begin fighting each other. The film's strongest idea is that the treasure is not something they simply steal. It is something they have to carry through consequence. That gives the second half a different kind of tension. It is no longer about whether they can outsmart the target. The target is already behind them. Now the question is whether they can survive what their own greed has created. The mission becomes less tactical and more primal. These men who once moved with military precision are reduced to bodies dragging weight across hostile land. The jungle and mountains are not just background scenery. They become part of the punishment. The landscape begins to push back against them. The helicopter cannot simply lift unlimited wealth over the Andes. The roads do not remain easy. The route does not stay clean. The escape does not behave like the fantasy they imagined when the money was still sitting in the walls. This is where the film's moral logic becomes physical. Greed has weight. Consequences have distance. A bad decision has terrain. That is a powerful concept, because Triple Frontier slowly strips the team of the illusion that this can still be a clean operation. In the beginning, they think like soldiers. By the middle, they are calculating like thieves. By the end, they are moving like survivors. That descent is the movie's real arc. The heist gives them the money, but the survival journey takes away their certainty. Every stage of the escape removes something from them. First, the plan, then the clean exit, then the safety of flight, then the ability to carry everything, then the confidence that they can reach the coast without paying a deeper price. And with every setback, the same question returns. What are they willing to give up? At first, they do not want to give up anything. That is the problem. The money is too close. The dream is too vivid. They can already imagine the new lives waiting for them. So they keep making choices that protect the fortune, even when those choices endanger the men carrying it. That is what makes the survival journey different from the heist. In the heist, the danger comes from the enemy. In the survival section, the danger comes from the team's refusal to let go. This is also where the film becomes more emotionally revealing. A straightforward heist can show skill, timing, and nerve. But a survival journey exposes character. It shows who stays calm, who panics, who clings to the mission, who starts questioning the cost, and who can admit that the prize may no longer be worth it. The problem is that Triple Frontier does not always push that emotional exposure as far as it could. The shift from heist to survival is strong in concept, but uneven in execution. Some moments have real pressure. The image of these men moving through mountains with money they can barely carry is exactly the kind of visual metaphor the film needs. It tells us everything without needing to explain it. They have become prisoners of their own reward. but other moments feel less controlled. The survival half sometimes stretches credibility. The same men who seemed disciplined and capable during the raid begin making choices that feel too careless, too obviously designed to create the next obstacle. The film wants greed to make them reckless, and that idea works. But sometimes the writing does not make the recklessness feel as psychologically sharp as it should. Still, the genre shift gives the movie its most memorable shape. If Triple Frontier had stayed only a heist film, it might have been cleaner, faster, and more satisfying. But by turning into a survival story, it reaches for something heavier. It tries to show that the true cost of the mission is not paid during the robbery. It is paid after, when the adrenaline fades and the men are left carrying the evidence of what they have become. That is why the escape matters. The survival journey is not just an extended action sequence. It is the consequence section of the story. It is the place where every earlier justification starts to collapse. They told themselves the money would fix their lives. Now it is threatening to end them. They told themselves they were professionals. Now they are making desperate choices. They told themselves this was controlled. Now the world is proving that nothing about greed stays controlled for long. The journey through the mountains and jungle should feel like a slow stripping away of illusion. And when the film gets that right, it becomes genuinely compelling. The characters are no longer chasing wealth. They are being chased by the result of wanting too much. Every mile becomes a reminder that the operation did not end when they left the compound. In a moral sense, that is when it truly began, because the heist was the decision. The survival journey is the consequence. That is the key to understanding this part of Triple Frontier. The movie is not simply switching genres for variety. It is using the shift to change the pressure on the characters. The first half asks, can they take the money? The second half asks, can they survive taking it? Those are very different questions. The first is about competence. The second is about character. And that is why the second half, even when flawed, gives the film its deeper purpose. It shows that pulling off the job was never the hardest part. The hardest part was living with the cost once the plan collapsed, once the terrain turned hostile, once the money became impossible to carry, and once the men had to decide whether survival mattered more than the fortune they had risked everything to steal. That is the brutal irony of Triple Frontier. The team succeeds at the heist, but success becomes the beginning of their downfall. They get the money, they beat the target, they escape the compound, and then the real punishment starts. That is what makes the transition from heist thriller to survival journey so important. It turns the film from a story about taking into a story about carrying money, carrying guilt, carrying loyalty, carrying fear, carrying the weight of a decision that seemed justifiable when it was still only a plan. By the time the mission becomes a fight to stay alive, the question is no longer whether these men can win. The question is how much of themselves they will lose before they finally understand that some prizes are too heavy to bring home. The raid is where Triple Frontier becomes the movie it promised to be. Up to this point, the film has been building toward the operation. The team has been gathered. The target has been identified. The plan has been explained. The risks have been measured. And for a while, the entire movie feels like it is tightening around one question. Can these men still do what they were trained to do? The answer, during the raid, is yes. This sequence works because it finally gives the film a sense of focus. Everything becomes immediate. The characters are no longer talking about the mission, questioning the mission, or negotiating with their own doubts. They are inside it. They are moving through the jungle, approaching the compound, entering enemy territory, and operating with the kind of discipline that reminds us these are not ordinary criminals improvising their way through a robbery. They are professionals. That is what makes the raid so satisfying. It has the rhythm of trained men executing a plan under pressure. Every movement feels controlled. Every second matters. The time window creates tension. The geography of the house creates tension. The possibility of returning guards creates tension. And once the money is discovered, the sequence gains a new layer of pressure because the mission suddenly becomes bigger than anyone expected. Before this moment, the film is still setting the board. During the raid, the pieces finally move, and the action has a different texture here compared with the rest of the movie. It is not just noise. It is not just gunfire thrown onto the screen to wake the audience up. The tension comes from process. The men search, clear rooms, communicate, adjust, and keep moving. The sequence understands that tactical action works best when the audience can follow what is happening. We know the goal. We understand the risk. We feel the clock ticking. That clarity is important. A lot of action films mistake chaos for intensity. Triple Frontier, at its best, does the opposite. The raid feels intense because it is organized. The camera allows us to understand the space. The team's movements make sense. The violence, when it arrives, does not feel like random spectacle. It feels like the consequence of a plan being pushed beyond its limits. This is where the film's military angle pays off most strongly. These men may be morally compromised, but they are still skilled. The raid lets us see that skill in action. It shows why Pope believed they could pull this off. It shows why the team trusted their own abilities. It shows why the mission seemed possible in the first place. For a brief stretch, the film sells the fantasy of perfect execution, not because everything goes smoothly, but because the men respond to complications with confidence. And then greed enters the frame. That is the brilliance of the raid as a turning point. The action sequence does not simply exist to deliver thrills. It becomes the place where the movie's moral problem fully awakens. At first, the team has a plan. Get in, take what they came for, leave within the window. But the discovery of the hidden fortune changes the air in the room. Suddenly, the raid is no longer only about survival or mission success. It is about temptation. The money is everywhere. It is not a bag. It is not a safe. It is not a neat stack waiting to be collected. It is buried inside the walls, hidden throughout the house, almost overwhelming in its scale. That image matters because it turns greed into something physical. The characters are not tempted by an abstract promise. They are standing in front of impossible wealth, close enough to touch it, close enough to believe it can change everything. And that is when the sequence becomes more than action. It becomes a test. The team's greatest enemy in that moment is not just the drug lord or the guards. It is the question of when to stop. How much is enough? How long can they stay? How much danger can they justify for another load of cash? The raid becomes the first real fracture between discipline and desire. That is why this scene is so strong. It combines the film's best elements in one place. Tactical suspense, visual clarity, character motivation, greed, and consequence. Everything the movie wants to be is present here. A dangerous mission, a believable team, a strong location, a moral trap, a ticking clock. A reward too large to carry safely. For once, the film does not have to explain its themes. It lets the situation speak. You can see the change happening in the men. Their original purpose begins to bend. The mission parameters start to stretch. The clean exit becomes less important than the size of the haul. The same soldiers who came in with precision begin to lose time because the money is too much to ignore. And Triple Frontier builds a lot in concept, but not always in character detail. We understand the mission's moral shape. We understand greed has corrupted the team. We understand the money became a burden. We understand the men are paying for their choices. But because some individual emotional arcs remain thin, the ending can feel more meaningful as an idea than as a deeply personal conclusion. That is why the finale divides people. The film wants us to feel the tragedy of the group, but it has not always made every man's individual tragedy sharp enough. So the ending has the right mood, but not always the strongest impact. It is bleak. It is quiet. It is morally serious. It avoids easy triumph. But seriousness is not the same as devastation. For the ending to be devastating, every final decision should feel like the inevitable result of who these men are. Every loss should feel personal. Every sacrifice should echo a flaw we have watched grow throughout the film. Every remaining piece of money should feel contaminated by memory. The film reaches for that, but it does not always fully earn it. Still, there is something interesting about the refusal to end cleanly. A more conventional heist film might have given the team a clever escape, a last-minute victory, or a satisfying split of the spoils. Triple Frontier knows that would be wrong for this story. The film has spent too long showing that the money is not liberation. It is weight, it is temptation, it is moral infection. So by the end, the question is no longer, how much did they get? The question is, what did the money take from them? That is the better question, and it is the question the finale should leave hanging in the air. Because the men do not end the journey as the same people who began it. They have crossed lines. They have lost control. They have seen their professionalism collapse into greed. They have watched a mission built on brotherhood become a test of survival and guilt. They have discovered that taking from a corrupt man does not keep corruption away from them. That is the film's final moral statement. You cannot steal dirty money and expect to remain untouched by it. The ending's strongest idea is that the prize has lost its purity. At the beginning, the money looked like possibility. It looked like a future. It looked like dignity, security, and justice. By the end, it carries the memory of every mistake, every delay, every argument, every dangerous choice, every life placed at risk because they wanted more than they could safely take. That transformation is powerful. Money begins as a dream and ends as evidence. Evidence of greed, evidence of self-deception, evidence that these men were not as in control as they believed. Evidence that the mission was never as clean as they needed it to be. That is why the ending does not need to be happy. In fact, it should not be. The whole point is that the fantasy of the heist has been destroyed. The men may have entered the story imagining freedom, but the ending shows that freedom bought through moral compromise does not feel like freedom at all. It feels like damage. And yet, the finale also exposes one of the film's central weaknesses. It wants the emotional cost to feel enormous, but the writing has not always deepened the characters enough for that cost to fully crush the audience. We feel the shape of the tragedy, but we do not always feel its full weight. That is the difference between a good ending and a great one. A good ending completes the moral arc. A great ending makes the audience feel that there was no other possible conclusion. Triple Frontier comes close to the first. It struggles with the second. The final emotional payoff is thematically appropriate. The mission ends in loss, regret, and a kind of bitter clarity. The men do not get the heroic conclusion they may have imagined. The film refuses to reward them in a simple way. It understands that they have crossed too many lines for the ending to feel victorious. But because the journey there has been uneven, the ending can feel less like a devastating inevitability and more like a somber statement. It tells us this mattered, but it does not always make us feel it as deeply as it should. That is especially important because Triple Frontier is built around brotherhood. The ending should make the viewer feel what the mission has done to that brotherhood. It should feel like the bond has survived, but not unchanged. Like the men still care about each other, but now carry knowledge that cannot be removed. Like loyalty brought them together, but greed left scars inside that loyalty. The film gestures toward that feeling, and in some moments it finds it. There is a quiet sadness in the idea that these men went searching for one final act of control and found only another form of damage. They wanted to use the mission to reclaim dignity, but the mission forced them to confront how fragile their dignity had become. They wanted money to solve the emptiness of civilian life, but the ending suggests that what is broken in them cannot be repaired by cash. That is a strong emotional conclusion. The issue is not the idea. The issue is intensity. The ending would have landed harder if the film had more fully personalized the stakes earlier, if each man's need for the money had been clearer, if each man's moral compromise had been more distinct, if the dialogue had carried more subtext and less explanation, if the survival journey had felt less uneven and more like an unstoppable moral reckoning. Then the final scenes could have been devastating. Instead, they are effective but muted. They close the story. They underline the cost. They leave a bitter aftertaste, but they do not completely transform the film. And maybe that is the most honest way to understand the ending. It is a final expression of the movie's overall condition. Strong in concept, serious in tone, visually and morally appropriate, but not as emotionally overwhelming as the material demands. The ending knows what the film is supposed to be about. It knows this is a story about greed becoming punishment. It knows this is a story about men mistaking money for justice. It knows this is a story about brotherhood being strained by selfishness. It knows this is a story about veterans trying to reclaim value through the wrong mission, but knowing those things is not the same as making them unforgettable. That is why some viewers walk away satisfied, while others walk away frustrated. If you connect to the film's somber mood and moral direction, the ending may feel right. If you needed sharper character work and stronger dramatic payoff, the ending may feel too thin for the weight it is trying to carry. Both responses are valid because the finale contains both qualities. It has emotional intention, but incomplete emotional force. Still, the ending does one important thing correctly. It refuses to let the heist fantasy survive. It does not allow the audience to treat the money as a clean victory. It does not let the men walk away untouched. It understands that the true ending of this story is not about wealth, but about what wealth exposed, and that is the most meaningful final note. By the end of Triple Frontier, the money is no longer the answer. It is the reminder, a reminder of how easily discipline can collapse, a reminder of how quickly brotherhood can be tested, a reminder of how resentment can disguise greed, a reminder that men who feel undervalued can still make choices that destroy their integrity, a reminder that one final job is rarely final in the way people imagine, because even when the mission ends, the consequences do not. The men may leave the terrain behind, but they do not leave behind what happened there. They carry the memory of the choices, the losses, the compromises, and the moment they realized that the fortune they wanted so badly had become the thing that broke the mission apart. That is the ending's best idea. The real payout is not money. It is the bitter understanding that some rewards cost more than they return. Triple Frontier is not a bad film. That is the first thing that has to be said. It is too polished, too well cast, too visually strong, and too conceptually interesting to dismiss as a failure. There is real craft here. There is a strong premise. There are moments of tension. There is an ensemble with believable chemistry. There is a heist that works in pieces, a survival journey with striking imagery, and a central idea about greed that gives the movie more weight than a basic action thriller. But it is also not the great film it clearly could have been. And that is what makes Triple Frontier so frustrating. This is the kind of movie where the disappointment comes from potential, not emptiness. You can see the better version hiding inside almost every part of it, a sharper version, a meaner version, a more emotional version, a version where the characters are deeper, the writing is tighter, the social commentary cuts harder, and the final act lands with the force of tragedy rather than the mood of one. That is the strange position the film occupies. It is watchable, sometimes genuinely gripping, but rarely unforgettable. The premise alone should have carried enormous dramatic power. 5 former Special Forces soldiers, struggling with civilian life, reunite to rob a drug lord of a hidden fortune. The mission starts with tactical confidence, then collapses under the weight of greed. That is a strong foundation because it contains action, morality, brotherhood, politics, and survival all in one package. The film knows this. It understands that the money should not simply be loot. It should be temptation. It should be burden. It should be punishment. It should reveal who these men are when their discipline meets desire. That is the smartest idea in the movie. The more money they take, the less free they become. And when Triple Frontier leans into that idea, it works. The raid has tension. The discovery of the money has power. The team dynamic has energy. The landscapes are beautiful and dangerous. The image of trained men dragging impossible wealth through hostile terrain is exactly the kind of visual metaphor a movie like this needs. In those moments, the film feels close to something special, but then it keeps pulling back. The writing does not fully deepen the men. The dialogue sometimes explains what the film should have trusted us to feel. The pacing stretches in places where it should tighten. The villain and wider world remain thinner than they needed to be. The survival half has strong imagery, but also credibility problems. And the ending, while thematically right, does not completely deliver the emotional devastation the story seems to promise. So the final impression is complicated. Triple Frontier is entertaining enough to recommend with conditions. It is a solid watch if you enjoy grounded action thrillers, damaged male ensembles, heist stories, and survival journeys where the prize slowly becomes a curse. It has enough craftsmanship to keep your attention and enough atmosphere to feel more serious than disposable streaming content. But it is also the kind of film that leaves you thinking about what it did not become. That feeling follows it everywhere. The cast is strong, but the characters are underwritten. The action is tense in moments, but not consistently thrilling. The visuals are excellent, but the emotional depth does not always match them. The themes are rich, but not fully explored. The moral collapse is compelling, but not as psychologically sharp as it could have been. That is why the word almost defines the movie so well. Almost a great heist thriller, almost a brutal survival drama, almost a powerful veteran story, almost a sharp critique of greed and exploitation, almost a devastating study of brotherhood under pressure. But almost is not enough to make a film great. It is enough to make it interesting, and Triple Frontier is definitely interesting. It is interesting because its flaws are connected to its ambition. This is not a movie failing because it has nothing to say. It fails, or at least falls short, because it wants to say several things and does not sharpen all of them equally. It wants the excitement of action, the weight of drama, the bitterness of social commentary, and the physical punishment of a survival thriller. That is a lot to carry, and much like the men in the story, the film sometimes takes on more weight than it can handle. Still, there is value in what it attempts. The movie does not glamorize the heist as clean victory. It does not let the money remain a fantasy. It does not allow these men to walk away as uncomplicated heroes. It understands that dirty money leaves a stain, even when stolen from someone worse. That moral instinct gives the film seriousness. The problem is that seriousness needs precision. If the film wants to be about wounded veterans, we need deeper wounds. If it wants to be about brotherhood, we need more painful fractures. If it wants to be about greed, we need each man's greed to feel personal. If it wants to be about moral collapse, we need to feel the collapse from the inside, not just watch its consequences from the outside. Triple Frontier gives us the outline of that deeper film, but not always the full experience of it. And yet it remains hard to dismiss, because the cast keeps it alive, the locations give it scale, the raid gives it momentum, the money gives it a strong metaphor, the physical burden of the escape gives it a distinctive shape. There are enough good scenes here to make the movie worth watching, even if there are not enough great ones to make it linger as long as it should. That is the final verdict. Triple Frontier is a polished, serious, well-mounted thriller with a great cast and a strong central idea. It is not hollow. It is not incompetent. It is not without tension, craft, or meaning. But it is also underwritten, uneven, and emotionally less powerful than its premise demands. It gives you a movie worth watching, but it keeps reminding you of the movie worth remembering that it almost was. And maybe that is the most accurate way to describe it. Triple Frontier is a film about men carrying too much, made by a film that also carries too much. Too many genres, too many themes, too many ambitions left half-developed. The weight is impressive, but the balance is imperfect. So by the end, the film leaves behind the same feeling as the mission itself. Not total failure, not true victory. Just the sense that something valuable was there, something powerful was within reach, and somehow, despite all the talent and effort involved, too much of it was left behind.